The key political issue right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo is elections. The presidential and legislative elections, originally scheduled for November, still haven't been held, despite a last-minute agreement between the opposition and the ruling party that they would be held during 2017. And in exchange for this, the opposition agreed that President Joseph Kabila could stay on in office, provided he didn't attempt to amend the constitution and remove term limits that would allow him to stand for re-election. However, now it's become clear to everyone that elections aren't going to be held during 2017. So the Congolese opposition has started to talk about ways to force Kabila out of office by the end of the year. The problem is that over this past year, the opposition leaders have shown division and shown infighting, which has really damaged their standing with the Congolese population, hurt their ability to bring people out onto the streets. Meanwhile, the ruling party that supports President Kabila insists that he isn't going anywhere and he's staying on during the transition and until elections are held. And meanwhile, in the east of the country, Mai militia groups that fiercely oppose President Kabila remaining in office are coordinating more and more amongst themselves and working together to fight against his government and against the state. The problem is that on their own, they don't pose much of a threat to President Kabila's government over in Kinshasa. The most likely way for President Kabila to remain in power beyond 2017 is if he manages to get a significant portion of the opposition to support either a referendum or an amendment that changes the constitution, removes term limits, and allows him to stand for re-election. Now, the most likely source for Kabila to find the support within the opposition is from the UDPS party led by Felix Tshisekedi. Recently, Felix has very much come out strongly against the idea of the removal of term limits or even Kabila staying on in office any longer beyond 2017. But if we go back further historically, Felix Tshisekedi has been more open to the idea of dialogue and working with President Kabila. But if Kabila could win over Felix Tshisekedi, or even just most of the UDPS party, this would probably enable him to hold the referendum or push through an amendment that would remove term limits and allow him to stand for re-election. President Kabila is most likely to win over this kind of support he needs from the opposition and from Felix Tshisekedi or from the UDPS party if the opposition protests that are held in Kinshasa during late 2017 against Kabila remaining in office or against constitutional amendments during 2018. If these protests fizzle out after just a couple of days, and if they don't succeed in shutting down large sections of the city or preventing police and security officers from controlling it. If police and soldiers continue to obey orders from Kabila and suppress these protests for him, which would essentially mean that they've been sufficiently paid recently, then President Kabila will probably be able to maintain control over the city and will hold on and remain in office. The most likely scenario for President Kabila being ousted by protests has two possible beginnings. Firstly, either the Catholic Church, the opposition, and civil society groups hold large mass protests in the capital Kinshasa in late 2017 against Kabila remaining on in office longer, or in early 2018 against him amending the constitution to remove term limits so he could stand for re-election. Secondly, political demonstrations and mass marches could grow out of other gatherings, for example, for a notable football match or the funeral of a significant person. Either way, if these protests and these demonstrations are able to shut down large sections of downtown Kinshasa, and if they're able to turn them into no-go areas for police and for soldiers for longer than a week, this really starts to threaten Kabila's continued administration. If police and soldiers are going unpaid at this time, you could see police and soldiers, like the police first and then the army, refusing to go out and suppress protests for Kabila, instead mutinying and remaining in their barracks. This would allow protesters to march on the seat of power and threaten to displace Kabila directly. And this would obviously involve a general breakdown in law and order on the streets of Kinshasa and a lack of control. If Kabila is desperate, and if he sees this coming, he may attempt to avert it by giving the police and the army permission to go out and to loot the population, to take what they want from it, to try to buy them off and keep them on side. But this is very much a desperate last gamble by Kabila and would show that he has no options left and he's casting around for a way to keep himself in power. In this scenario, Kabila would most likely flee Kinshasa, probably to Kindu in the east of the country, planning to retake power. However, as soon as he's out of Kinshasa, Kabila returning himself to the presidency and restoring his control over the country becomes an increasingly remote possibility, and instead he may decide simply to go into exile. Now, at this point, in the capital Kinshasa, existing political alliances will have broken down and no one will be able to control the crowds on the streets, not even the opposition leaders themselves. Now, the most likely actor that would be able to put together some kind of a process for creating a transitional authority would be the Catholic Church at this point. And they might be able to bring together the leaders of the various opposition and ruling party groups and to have a transitional process for creating an authority whose mandate would be to hold elections as soon as possible. The most likely scenario for a military coup ousting President Kabila has a lot in common with the scenarios that would see him being ousted by mass protests in the city. If protracted protests and rioting in the capital Kinshasa are taking place, and Kabila shows no sign of being able to restore order, that's when it would be most likely for elements of the military to decide to remove him themselves, probably by seizing him personally and by taking key government buildings, key media buildings in the capital. The difficulty with this scenario is it's unclear who the Congolese military would actually put in office in place of Kabila, why that person would be preferable to them to him. And in any case, the military is very unlikely to act as a cohesive unit in support of a coup attempt. What this means is that a successful coup would most likely require some sort of external sponsor, perhaps a neighboring country. And the problem with this is that none of the DRC's neighbors currently show themselves as having much of an appetite for coming in and sponsoring such an attempt. And a foreign sponsor would be most likely be necessary in order to provide incentives for soldiers to go along with the coup attempt and to help usher in and foster a successor who could step in and fill the void after Kabila. The implications, both political and security-wise, of such a coup attempt would depend massively on who that foreign sponsor is.